I want you to picture something. It's a word that usually belongs in a museum. Or maybe a horror movie. Sarcophagus?
Oh, yeah. Heavy imagery there.
Right. When you hear that word, you think of ancient Egypt. Heavy stone, sealed tight, meant to protect a king for eternity. Or, maybe think of Chernobyl.
Right, that massive containment shell they built to just lock away the radiation.
Exactly. It implies something final, something that isn't really meant to be opened again. But today, we aren't talking about pharaohs. And we aren't talking about a reactor meltdown. We are talking about active construction. Right now, in 2026.
Yeah, it's happening as we speak.
And intelligence analysts are using that specific word, sarcophagus, to describe a massive concrete structure being built over a sensitive military facility in Iran.
And this isn't just like a roof. It's a calculated strategic move that completely changes the physics of the battlefield.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We have a pretty heavy stack of sources on the desk today. We're going through fresh satellite imagery analysis from the Institute for Science and International Security, or ISIS, along with reporting from Reuters and the New York Times. And honestly, looking at it all, it feels like we're looking at two entirely different worlds.
It really does. It's this weird split-screen reality. On one side, you've got the diplomatic track happening over in Geneva, handshakes, polished tables, a lot of talk about significant progress.
And on the other side.
Dump trucks, cement mixers, thousands of tons of earth being moved around in Tehran to just, bury secrets before anyone can get to them.
That is the exact tension we need to unpack for you today. Because while the diplomats are talking, the engineers are digging. Our mission today is to look past those polished headlines and understand the actual physical reality on the ground.
Right, because we aren't just asking what is being built.
Exactly. We need to understand why specific engineering choices, like burying a tunnel entrance or pouring a concrete headwork, why that fundamentally alters the strategic game.
Because at a certain point, construction becomes strategy. I mean, if you pour enough concrete, you don't just change the landscape, you change what your enemy can actually do to you.
So let's start with the visual that really grabbed me from the reports. The sarcophagus, it's happening at the Parchin military complex, which is southeast of Tehran. What exactly are we looking at here?
So we are zooming in on a very specific facility known as Taligan 2. Now, for those who haven't memorized the map of Iranian military sites,
which is probably most of us.
Fair enough. Taligan 2 has a history. It's long been linked to the research and development phase of Iran's nuclear program.
Past tense or present?
Well, that's kind of the billion-dollar question right now. But the construction is very much present tense. The analysis from the Institute for Science and International Security shows that they didn't just, renovate the building. They built a massive concrete shield around it.
Wow.
And this is where the sarcophagus part comes in, they completely covered that shield with earth, just buried it.
Okay, I want to pause on the engineering here for a second. I get the concrete. Concrete is hard. Makes sense. But why the dirt? If I'm building a bunker to stop a missile, doesn't the concrete do the heavy lifting? Why bury it?
It's actually a physics problem. Modern bunker-busting missiles, like the ones in the US or Israeli arsenals, they rely on kinetic energy and really precise fusing.
Okay.
They are essentially giant supersonic darts. They're designed to punch through hard surfaces before detonating inside.
So they need to hit something hard to trigger.
Well, they need to maintain their trajectory and their structural integrity to penetrate. When you pile 30 or 40 feet of compacted earth on top of a concrete shell, you create a few major problems for the attacker.
Like what?
First, the earth absorbs and dissipates the shockwave. But more importantly, it messes with the fusing and the penetration mechanics.
Oh, so it acts like a cushion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It slows the projectile down before it hits the hard shell, which potentially causes it to detonate early, in the dirt, rather than inside the room where it would actually do damage.
That's clever.
It is. Plus, as David Albright from ISIS points out in the reporting, once you cover the whole thing in dirt and, plant some grass on it.
It just looks like a hill.
Right. It becomes, in his exact words, a completely unrecognizable bunker. From a satellite perspective, you lose your targeting coordinates. You literally don't know where the center of the room is anymore. You're just guessing.
And in a military strike, guessing is a pretty great way to fail.
Absolutely.
So they're essentially erasing the target from the map while simultaneously armoring it. But what are they hiding inside? You mentioned Taliban 2 has a history.
The leading theory among analysts involves a high-explosive containment chamber.
Which sounds incredibly dangerous. But what does that have to do with nuclear weapons? I always thought nukes were about centrifuges and enriching uranium.
That's the fuel production side of things.
Uh,
But to turn that fuel into a weapon, specifically an implosion-type weapon, you need a very complex detonator. You have to surround a core of nuclear material with conventional explosives, and you have to set them off with absolute perfect timing to compress the core.
like squeezing a sponge instantly from all sides at the exact same time.
That's a great way to picture it. And you can't just simulate that on the computer. You actually have to test the explosives. To do that without anyone detecting the shock waves or the chemical signatures from the blast, you need a perfectly sealed chamber.
A high explosive containment chamber.
Precisely.
So if Taliban 2 houses one of those chambers and they just buried it under a concrete sarcophagus mat.
Then they have effectively created a safe space to test nuclear triggers. One that is invisible to satellites and immune to standard airstrikes.
That's a pretty distinct escalation from just doing research. But Parchin isn't the only site getting a makeover right now.
Yeah.
The report also mentions buried tunnels at Isfahan and Natanz.
Yes. And this is where the story sort of shifts from shielding a room to basically sealing the doors. Let's talk about Isfahan first.
Now, Isfahan definitely rings a bell. Anyone following this topic remembers June 2015.
Operation Midnight Hammer.
Right. That was a massive flashpoint.
Yeah.
U.S. forces targeted the site specifically because it was exposed. Right. It was a lesson in vulnerability.
It was. And it seems the Iranians took that lesson very much to heart. They know Isfahan is a giant bullseye. So looking at the satellite imagery from February 9th of this year, they are doing something radical. They aren't just putting up a new gate or a fence. They are actually burying the entrances.
The report says completely buried.
Completely. Just mounds of earth over where the doors used to be.
But wait, how do you get in? If you bury the door, isn't the whole facility useless?
You have to assume there are other concealed access points, maybe service tunnels miles away that connect underground, but the main obvious drive-in entrances, gone. And the strategic logic behind doing this is fascinating.
Is it the same logic as Parchin? Blast protection?
Partly, yeah. You can't exactly shoot a cruise missile down a hallway if the hallway is filled with solid dirt. But there's a second reason that really keeps analysts up at night. It's about preventing ground access.
You mean soldiers, boots on the ground.
Think about it. Isfahan holds enriched material. In a full-scale conflict, you might not want to just bomb it and spread radiation over the whole region. You might want to send in special forces to seize the material or disable the equipment manually.
Like a raid, like you see in the movie.
Exactly. But a raid relies on speed. You land, you breach the door, you get in, you get out. If the door is under 50 feet of rock and soil, you don't have a raid anymore. You have an excavation project.
And you definitely can't excavate while being actively shot at.
Right. It buys time. It turns a 10-minute breach into a 2-day engineering problem. It effectively takes the special ops option completely off the table for the U.S. or Israel.
So it forces the opponent into a corner where their only option is a massive earth-shattering bombardment, which nobody really wants to do.
That's the goal. Deterrence by making the solution just too messy to attempt. And we see a really interesting variation of this at Natanz. That's the site they call Pickaxe Mountain.
Pickaxe Mountain. You really can't make this stuff up. It sounds like a level in a video game.
It does, but it's remarkably descriptive.
Yeah.
The imagery from February 10th shows just a hive of activity there. Cranes, cement mixers, the works. They are building what's called a reinforced concrete headwork structure.
Headwork structure. Break that down for us non-engineers.
Sure. Think of it like a massive, heavily reinforced concrete awning, or a porch sticking out from the side of the mountain right where the tunnel entrance is.
Okay, so like a tunnel extension.
Yes, but built to bear an incredible load. The purpose of this awning isn't to keep the rain off the road. It's so they can pile rocks and earth on top of the entrance without actually blocking the road underneath.
Oh, wow.
They are artificially thickening the mountain at its weakest point, the door.
They're literally moving the mountain over the entrance.
Essentially, yes. They are making the door as thick as the rest of the bunker.
Okay, so if I step back for a second and look at the whole board here. We have the sarcophagus at Parchin. We have the buried doors at Isfahan. We have the concrete mountain movers at Natanz. My gut reaction, and I assume the reaction of a lot of you listening, is that Iran is sprinting for the bomb. You don't lock the doors like this unless you're about to do something you really don't want people to see.
That is the logical assumption for sure. It feels like a sprint. But here is where the story actually takes a pretty sharp turn. The New York Times ran a deep analysis on resource allocation across these sites, and they found something that completely contradicts that whole narrative.
What did they find?
They found that despite all this concrete pouring at the nuclear sites, the actual nuclear operations, the spinning of the centrifuges, the enrichment work appear largely inactive, or at least they're not intensifying.
Wait, so they are building the fortress, but they aren't running the factory inside?
Not at full capacity, no. The real frenzy, the place where all the immediate resources are going, it's happening at the ballistic missile site.
The delivery systems.
We have to remember the context here. We're in February 2026. Think back to the conflict with Israel last year, the 12-day conflict.
Right. It was intense. A lot of infrastructure got hit on both sides.
Precisely. Iranian missile sites took an absolute beating. Their sword was dulled, so to speak. What the satellite imagery shows now is a desperate rush to sharpen that sword. Construction has resumed at more than a dozen missile sites that were damaged.
I'm reading about the Sharud Space Center in the report.
Yeah, that's a prime example. Sharud was back to being operational within months of being attacked.
So the priority isn't the warhead right now. It's the rocket.
It's a decoupling of the program. Think of it this way. A nuclear warhead is just a very heavy, very expensive paperweight if you don't have a missile that can actually survive long enough to launch it.
That makes total sense. If your silos are just rubble, it really doesn't matter how much uranium you have stockpiled.
Exactly. So the strategy seems to be to prioritize conventional deterrence right now, rebuild the missiles to keep enemies at bay, and meanwhile, use this time to harden the nuclear sites. Not to sprint for a breakout today, but to ensure that when they do decide to break out eventually, the facilities are completely impregnable.
They're fixing the sword and armoring the shield at the same time.
That's a really great way to put it. And they aren't just building the sword, by the way, they're rattling it. We can't ignore what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz right now.
Oh, the naval drills. Intelligent control of the Strait of Hormuz. Very subtle name.
Very subtle. While the cement dries up in the mountains, the Revolutionary Guard is out in the water conducting massive live fire exercises. They even closed portions of the waterway temporarily.
Which is huge.
They were firing missiles at targets inside the shipping lanes.
And for anyone who doesn't obsess over maritime logistics, the Strait of Hormuz is basically the jugular vein of the global oil economy.
It is. A huge percentage of the world's oil flows right through there. If you close that strait, you essentially turn off the lights in a massive chunk of the world. By drilling there, Iran is signaling to everyone, hey, we might be rebuilding, but we can still hurt you. Don't push us.
So we have this picture of a country that is clearly preparing for war. They're hardening bunkers, rebuilding missiles, firing live rounds in major oil lanes. But then, and this is the crazy part, we cut to Geneva.
The diplomatic split screen.
It's jarring. You read the reports from the nuclear talks, and it sounds like peace is breaking out.
Yeah, we're in the second round of talks between the U.S. and Iran right now. You have Abbas Araqi, the Iranian foreign minister, sitting down with mediators like Badr al-Busaidi from Oman. And the language they're using, it's surprisingly sunny.
Iraqi's talking about guiding principles. Al-Busaidi sees significant progress in identifying common goals.
Right. Delegations are actually drafting separate proposals. It all sounds very constructive. But looking at the whole picture, you have to ask yourself, is this genuine? Or is it part of the construction project?
Wait, you think the diplomacy's just cover?
Well, look at the threats lurking in the background of these talks. The source material highlights this perfectly. President Trump has been incredibly vocal. He has explicitly warned of military action if these negotiations fail.
And Iranian leaders have vowed to flatten U.S. bases if Washington launches another attack. So the sources are showing us that everyone essentially has a gun under the table.
Exactly. Nobody's pretending the stakes aren't life or death. So how does the construction fit the talks? I think we are seeing a clear strategy of talking while digging.
Talking while digging. Unpack that for us.
Diplomacy buys time. Negotiations take months. Drafting proposals back and forth takes weeks. Every single day that diplomats spend debating guiding principles in a nice hotel in Geneva is another day for the concrete to cure at Talakam 2.
Wow.
It's another day to pile more dirt on the doors at Isfahan.
So by engaging in the talks, they effectively delay any potential strike. And by the time the talks potentially collapse.
The bunkers are finished. The window for a military solution has literally been bricked up.
That is a cynical, but honestly incredibly effective strategy. It redefines what success means for them. We think success is a signed treaty. They might measure success by the cubic meters of concrete they can pour before the Americans walk away from the table.
Precisely. If your nuclear program becomes completely immune to airstrikes, the threat of military action, which is the main leverage the West has always relied on, loses its teeth. You don't have to negotiate as hard if you know you simply can't be bombed.
It feels like we are watching a door close in slow motion.
That's the reality on the ground, and it's complex, so let's recap the three main layers we've uncovered today for everyone listening.
Okay, layer 1, the sarcophagus and the tunnels. We're seeing the physical hardening at Parchin, Isfahan, and Natanz. They are using earth and concrete to make these sites immune to air and ground raids.
Layer 2, the strategic pivot. They are prioritizing the rebuilding of their ballistic missile infrastructure, the delivery systems over immediate nuclear enrichment. They are fixing the launcher before they finish the bomb.
And layer 3, the diplomatic paradox. Talking in Geneva while digging in Tehran. Using the time provided by diplomacy to make the military option completely obsolete.
And that brings us to the real so what for you, the listener. Why does this matter to your life? Because for 30 years, global security has rested on a fundamental assumption that if Iran ever gets too close to a bomb, the US or Israel could physically step in and stop them.
The military option was always the ultimate backstop.
But every truckload of cement pouring into Pickaxe Mountain makes that assumption a little less true. We are moving toward a future where military intervention simply might not be technically possible. The easy button is being permanently disconnected.
It really forces you to look at those news headlines differently. When you see diplomats meet, you want to feel hope. But when you see the satellite photos, you realize the clock is ticking on a completely different timeline.
It forces us to ask what the actual end game is here.
And that leads us to our final thought for today. Something for you to mull over. We started with that image of the sarcophagus, a tomb.
Right. And a tomb is usually built to bury something dead, to remember it.
But in this case, looking at that massive mountain of dirt over Taligan 2, you have to ask yourself a different question.
Yeah.
If you build a tomb over your nuclear program, are you trying to kill it? Or are you trying to make sure it can never be killed by anyone else?
That's the question.
Something to chew on. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
Stay curious, everyone.
See you next time.